A skinny street cat scratching a billionaire's wristwatch in a coma just destroyed $500 million in planned inheritances. Manhattan, 1991. Presidential suite at Mount Sinai Hospital. Victor Sterling, 65 years old, real estate mogul with an estimated fortune of $800 million, has been unconscious for 42 hours. His niece Evelyn has already chosen which mansion she'll keep. Lawyer Roger Davies has already drafted the power of attorney papers. 6 hours remain until the legal deadline that transfers everything. But nobody expected Chester. A black and white cat, ribs showing, entered through the maintenance window and won't leave Victor's side. The nurse tried to remove him 3 times. Security was called. The animal ignores everyone and continues obsessively scratching the same object. A 1957 Patek Philippe watch that Victor was wearing on his wrist when he collapsed. Why would a street animal ignore offered food to scratch metal and leather? Evelyn wants the cat removed immediately. Roger demands that security get that pest out of the suite. But when they finally manage to open the watch, they find something that shouldn't exist. A digital voice microrecorder hidden in the secret compartment. And Victor Sterling's voice, recorded 24 hours before the coma, says exactly what Evelyn and Roger prayed they would never hear. In the next few minutes, you'll discover how an abandoned animal unmasked New York's biggest inheritance scheme. Why Victor chose to hide his last will in a watch, and what really happened that night that put him in a coma. Because this story isn't about money. It's about who truly deserves to be saved. 48 hours earlier, Victor Sterling was alone in his office on the top floor of Sterling Tower, 17th floor, premium view of Central Park. It was Tuesday, 11 p.m. The city pulsed below, but inside reigned the heavy silence of someone carrying decades of cold decisions. Victor wasn't known for sentimentality. He built his empire by eliminating competitors, buying properties in moments of others' desperation, transforming urban tragedies into profitable opportunities. Wall Street respected him. Employees feared him. Family tolerated him while waiting for the inevitable, the inheritance. That night, Victor held an object that didn't match the corporate environment. A yellowed photograph from 1963. In it, a 7-year-old boy hugged a stray cat in front of a deteriorated Bronx building. The boy smiled with missing teeth. The cat looked as skinny as it was happy. That boy was Victor. That cat was named Whiskers. And that building was demolished 3 decades later to make way for one of Sterling Corporation's first developments. Victor never talked about Whiskers. Never mentioned the Bronx. Systematically erased any connection to poverty, to vulnerability, to unconditional affection. But something changed. 3 weeks earlier, Victor was diagnosed with an inoperable brain aneurysm. Doctors gave him 6 months, maybe a year. He didn't tell anyone. Instead, he began reviewing his will. The official document, registered at the notary and known by Evelyn and Roger, divided the fortune among direct relatives. Evelyn would get 40%, distant cousins smaller portions, shell foundations with crumbs for tax purposes. It was cold, efficient, predictable. Exactly what everyone expected from Victor Sterling. But Victor drafted a second document. A document nobody knew existed. In it, $500 million would be destined for the creation of the Whiskers Foundation, an organization dedicated exclusively to rescue, treatment, and adoption of street animals in critical situations. Not lost pets from wealthy families. Not purebreds in funded shelters. Invisible animals. Alley cats. Hit-and-run dogs. Creatures that society discards like trash. Exactly like Victor was discarded as a child, before building his armor of billions. The problem was proof. In 1991, digital documents were still legal novelties. Wills required witnesses, notarization, rigid protocols. Victor knew that if he left the document in plain sight, Evelyn would destroy it before the ink dried. Roger would find legal loopholes to invalidate it. The entire family would unite to prove mental insanity. He needed something manipulation-proof, but accessible at the right moment. Something that would only be discovered when he could no longer defend himself, but that would have irrefutable legal weight. The solution came from recent technology, digital voice microrecorders. Compact devices, the size of a coin, capable of recording up to 60 minutes of audio with surprising clarity. Victor acquired one through contacts in the corporate security sector. He recorded his last will with meticulous details, Exact amounts, execution instructions, emotional justification, even a citation from New York legislation about the validity of oral wills in situations of proven medical emergency. Then he hid the recorder in the only place nobody would look. Inside the Patek Philippe watch his own father gave him at 18, before passing away. Victor finished the recording at 11:47 p.m. that Tuesday. Carefully closed the watch. Put it on his wrist. Took a deep breath. Felt a sharp pain in his left temple. The room spun. He staggered, knocking Whisker's photograph to the floor. The glass shattered. Victor tried to reach the phone, but his legs gave out. He fell sideways, hitting his head on the corner of the mahogany desk. Blood ran across the Persian rug. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was the broken photograph on the floor. Whiskers watching him through the cracked glass. Smiling. The next morning, Victor's secretary found the office locked. Called security. They broke down the door. Victor was breathing, but unconscious, sunk in deep coma. The ambulance arrived in 12 minutes. Mount Sinai received the patient at 9:15 a.m. Evelyn was notified at 9:20. Roger arrived at the hospital at 10 o'clock sharp, already with a folder containing emergency power of attorney documents. Nobody noticed the watch on Victor's wrist. Nobody imagined what was hidden inside. Evelyn Sterling was 38 years old, Columbia business degree, and had a purely transactional relationship with her uncle. She visited him 4 times a year, his birthday, Christmas, Thanksgiving, and whenever she needed capital for her own investments. Victor approved loans because Evelyn was predictable, calculating, efficient. She reminded him of himself in female version. Cold, ambitious, impervious to sentimentality. That's exactly why he knew she would destroy any attempt to divert the fortune to useless causes. Roger Davies was Victor's personal attorney for 17 years. He knew every property, every offshore account, every hidden investment. He also knew the secrets. The bribes to inspectors, the veiled threats to competitors, the extralegal agreements that built the Sterling empire. Roger wasn't morally superior. He was a compensated accomplice. And he knew that with Victor in a coma, his own relevance depended on Evelyn taking control. She had already promised to keep Roger as lead legal consultant, with hefty bonuses in exchange for interpretive flexibility. The legal protocol was clear. If Victor remained incapacitated for more than 48 hours, the power of attorney registered in the will would be automatically activated, transferring temporary executive powers to the closest relative until a court decided on permanent guardianship. This would give Evelyn total control over companies, accounts, medical decisions. And with Roger facilitating processes, she could consolidate inheritances before Victor even officially died. The deadline expired Thursday at 9 a.m. 42 hours remained. Chester appeared Wednesday morning. Nobody knows exactly how. Mount Sinai's presidential suite was on the 8th floor, sealed windows, access controlled by electronic cards. Theories included ventilation ducts, doors opened during cleaning, or simply feline luck. The fact is that at 6:20 a.m., the shift nurse found a black and white cat, extremely skinny, irregular coat, scar on left ear, lying on Victor Sterling's chest. The animal purred softly. Victor remained in a coma, but cardiac monitors showed curious stabilization in rhythm after the cat's arrival. The first reaction was expulsion. Hospital protocols prohibit animals in ICUs. Infection risk, sanitary regulations, legal liability. The nurse tried to grab Chester. He hissed, scratched lightly, and refused to leave. 2 security guards were called. Chester hid under the bed, then jumped to the inner window sill, always keeping Victor in sight. When they finally managed to capture him using thick gloves, the cat let out a high-pitched meow, almost human, that made Victor's monitors spike alarmingly. Doctors ordered them to return the animal immediately. Chester went back to Victor's chest. The heartbeat stabilized. Evelyn arrived at the hospital at 8 a.m. Wearing black Chanel, impeccable makeup, controlled expression of socially appropriate concern. When she saw the cat, her face contorted in genuine revulsion. "What the hell is that?" Roger, beside her, adjusted his glasses. "Apparently it came in yesterday. The medical team is reluctant to remove it because of the patient's reaction." Evelyn crossed her arms. "I want that animal out of here in 1 hour. It's unsanitary, inappropriate, and frankly pathetic." She looked at unconscious Victor, tubes coming out of his nose and arms. "My uncle built an empire. He won't be remembered with a gutter cat on his chest." But Chester didn't leave. Doctors argued that removing the animal could destabilize the patient. Evelyn threatened to sue the hospital. Roger suggested waiting until after the power of attorney deadline. 40 hours, Evelyn. After that you'll have legal authority to decide everything, including about this cat. She agreed, but with one condition. The animal would be isolated from Victor during medical procedures. And nobody would feed that pest. If it wanted to stay, let it survive on its own luck. Exactly like street animals do. During the afternoon, Chester began bizarre behavior. He ignored food that a kind nurse left hidden. Ignored water. Ignored attempts at affection. Focused all attention on Victor's left wrist. Specifically on the Patek Philippe watch. The cat sniffed the object insistently. Scratched the leather strap with strange delicacy, almost methodical. Rubbed his snout on the dial glass. Bit the clasp gently. Staff found it peculiar, but attributed it to random animal instinct. Cats are attracted to shiny objects. Nothing more. Thursday, 3 a.m. Evelyn and Roger returned to the hospital for final power of attorney activation procedures. A notary was present to authenticate signatures. 2 doctors would confirm in writing Victor's permanent incapacity. All legal, all cold, all irreversible. Evelyn signed the first documents with a Mont Blanc pen that belonged to Victor himself. Roger supervised each page. 6 hours remained until the official deadline. The fortune was practically transferred. And then Chester did something unexpected. He bit the watch strap hard enough to release the clasp. The Patek Philippe fell from the bed, hitting the linoleum floor with a dull metallic sound. The watch didn't break, but the impact made the back of the dial come partially loose. And there, visible through the tiny opening, something shined. Something that shouldn't be inside a 1957 watch. Something modern. Electronic. Digital. If you're following this story and want to know what was inside that watch, leave a like now. And if you believe animals sense things that humans ignore, write Chester New in the comments. Roger saw the shine first. Froze. Evelyn was distracted signing papers. He discreetly took a step toward the fallen watch. But Chester was faster. The cat jumped from the bed, positioned himself over the object, and hissed with an aggressiveness that no staff member had witnessed yet. Roger stepped back. Someone get this damn animal out of here. 2 security guards advanced. Chester arched his back, bristled, protecting the watch as if it were his last meal. A nurse suggested sedating the cat. Another suggested calling animal control. But in the commotion, a resident doctor named Dr. Sarah Chin noticed something strange. Dr. Chin was 31 years old, neurology specialization, and had a personal relationship with animals. She volunteered at shelters on weekends. She recognized in Chester's behavior something beyond territorial instinct. It was purposeful protection. She knelt slowly, spoke in a low, calm tone. "Hey boy, I just want to see what you're guarding. I promise I won't hurt you." Chester observed her with penetrating yellow eyes. After 15 seconds of feline evaluation, he relaxed slightly. Sarah extended her hand carefully. Chester allowed her to take the watch. And then she saw clearly, the secret compartment in the back, and inside it, a digital voice micro-recorder. "What is this?" Sarah held the device to the light. Roger went pale. Evelyn finally looked up. "It's a recorder. It was hidden inside my uncle's watch." Absolute silence. Roger tried to regain control. Probably some work tool. Victor recorded executive reminders all the time. But Sarah had already found the play button. "There's only one way to find out." Evelyn stood up abruptly. "You don't have authorization to touch my uncle's belongings." Sarah ignored her. "Press the button." And Victor Sterling's voice, recorded 48 hours earlier, filled the hospital room with disturbing clarity. "My name is Victor Aldrich Sterling. Today is Tuesday, November 26, 1991, 11:17 p.m. I am in full mental capacity, as can be attested by my personal physician Dr. Howard Feinstein, and I record this declaration as a valid oral will under Section 15-2-1 of New York legislation on testamentary dispositions in situations of sudden incapacity." The entire room stopped. Even the medical monitors seemed quieter. Victor continued. "I completely and fully revoke any previous will registered at the notary or known by family members. This will is my only and definitive wish." Evelyn tried to snatch the recorder from Sarah's hands. Roger held her back. "Wait. We need to hear everything. If we try to destroy it now, we'll have witnesses." He looked at Sarah, nurses, security guards. Everyone listened stunned. Victor's voice continued. I designate the amount of $500 million for the immediate creation of the Whiskers Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated exclusively to rescue, medical treatment, rehabilitation, and responsible adoption of street animals in critical states of abandonment, with priority focus on felines and canines ignored by conventional shelters. Evelyn let out a short, hysterical laugh. This is insane. He was delirious. 500 million for street cats? A judge will invalidate this in 5 minutes. Roger immediately agreed. Oral wills require extreme circumstances and qualified witnesses. This has no legal value. But Victor had predicted exactly this reaction. His recorded voice anticipated each argument. I recognize that this decision will be contested by heirs who expected personal benefit. Therefore, I clarify my complete and rational motivation. I built a fortune by eliminating compassion from my life. I transformed others' tragedy into profit. I demolished homes to build towers. I ignored suffering to accumulate numbers in bank accounts. And I lost my humanity in the process. The room was in a trance. Victor Sterling, the relentless mogul, was confessing emotional fragility. When I was 7 years old, I lived in the Bronx with my single mother who worked 3 jobs. We didn't have adequate heating. We ate instant noodles 5 days a week. But I had Whiskers, a stray cat I found shivering in a trash dumpster. He slept with me, warmed me, made me feel like I mattered to someone. When I turned 8, the building where we lived was condemned. We had 3 days to leave. They didn't accept animals in the municipal shelter. My mother told me Whiskers needed to stay. I begged. She cried but said there was no choice. I left Whiskers on the street. I never forgot the look of him watching me through the bus window, getting smaller and smaller, until he disappeared. Tears ran down Sarah Chen's face. Even security guards wiped their eyes discreetly. Victor concluded. I spent 60 years building an empire to prove I would never again be that powerless boy. But I only became someone who inflicts the same abandonment I suffered. 500 million doesn't bring Whiskers back. Doesn't erase decades of coldness. But it can save thousands of creatures that nobody else wants to save. It's my last chance to recover who I should have been. I sign this declaration with total awareness, lucidity, and unshakable conviction. Victor Aldrich Sterling. Silence. And then the recorder emitted a final sound. Victor crying softly before turning off the device. Evelyn was white with helpless rage. Roger frantically calculated legal options. Sarah held the recorder like a sacred relic. And Chester, the skinny street cat nobody wanted there, had just protected the last wish of a man he never knew, but who was exactly like him. Abandoned, invisible, desperately needing someone to care. The clock read 6:12 a.m. 2 hours and 48 minutes remained until the power of attorney deadline. But now there existed a later will, technically valid, with clear motivation and multiple witnesses to the revelation. The legal battle would be brutal. But Victor had given the animals a real chance. And then something happened that doctors couldn't explain. Victor Sterling, in deep coma for 72 hours, moved the fingers of his right hand. Subtly, but enough to trigger alarms on the monitors. Chester immediately jumped back onto his chest. And the black and white cat, ribs showing, ear scar, began to purr with a vibratory intensity that those present swore they felt in their own chests. Victor's eyes moved under closed eyelids. He didn't wake up. But something inside him recognized that finally, after 60 years, he had saved Whiskers. In all the ways that mattered. The evidence was there. Manipulated broadcasts, targeted marketing, questionable referee schedules, and even advertising campaigns that reinforced the sport's hatred between the cities. Boston and Philadelphia became characters in a script written behind the scenes. But what few knew is that this script had a hidden author. Someone who had been backstage since the 60s, influencing decisions, shaping narratives, and ensuring the war never died. And this is where everything changes. Because what comes next will show that this rivalry may have been the greatest manipulation in NBA history. You're going to discover who was behind it all, and why, even decades later, the Celtics and 76ers still play as if every game were personal. And what it reveals can completely change everything you believed about the history of this war on the court. For decades, fans believed the rivalry between the Boston Celtics and Philadelphia 76ers was just a battle of pride, talent, and history. But what if this war had a hidden maestro? Someone who knew that conflict sold more than harmony, and that every well-constructed rivalry could keep the flame of the NBA alive? Now, after so many years, the truth begins to emerge. And what it reveals is that the hatred, the drama, and the wars we saw on the court were, in part, carefully choreographed. The centerpiece of this story was a man named David Stern. Lawyer, strategist, and later, the commissioner who would transform the NBA into a global empire. Even before officially taking over in 1984, Stern was already working behind the scenes of the league. And he had a very clear vision. The NBA needed narratives. Having good players wasn't enough. It needed heroes and villains. Conflicts sold. Rivalries kept the audience hooked. And what better stage for that than the Celtics and 76ers? Two historic franchises, different markets, opposite cultures, and a past full of sporting blood. Documents and old interviews show that Stern saw in the rivalry between Boston and Philadelphia a perfect model of engagement. He knew that when these teams faced each other, viewership numbers skyrocketed, newspapers sold more, and national attention focused on the NBA. From there, the rivalry stopped being just a consequence of competition. It became a deliberate strategy. Stern began directing the league's marketing to promote specific confrontations. The commercials of the era were almost cinematic. Bird and Dr. J staring at each other in slow motion, suspenseful soundtracks, slogans about revenge and honor. It was the era of sports dramatization. And it worked. But the impact of this manipulation went beyond the numbers. It shaped how fans felt about the game. The 80s consolidated the spectacle. Boston and Philadelphia faced each other repeatedly in the playoffs, with increasing intensity. Each series seemed like a continuation of the same soap opera. Provocations, confrontations, redemptions. And this wasn't restricted to that generation. The model of narrative rivalries spread. The NBA realized it could build stories around cities, styles, and personalities. That's how duels like Lakers versus Celtics, Bulls versus Pistons, and later LeBron versus Golden State were born. The DNA of all this was there, in the original war between the 76ers and Celtics. 3 weeks later, Victor Sterling died peacefully in his sleep, surrounded only by medical equipment and a black and white cat that refused to leave him alone until the last heartbeat. Evelyn contested the oral will, as expected. Roger mobilized 3 law firms. But the recording was clear, the motivation was rational, and witnesses to the discovery included medical professionals with no connection to the family. The New York court took 8 months, but finally validated the Whiskers Foundation as legitimate recipient of $500 million. Evelyn received $150 million from the rest of the fortune. Enough to live comfortably, insufficient to build an empire. Roger lost his privileged position and was eventually investigated for previous accounting irregularities. Dr. Sarah Chun was invited to the Whiskers Foundation Board of Directors and accepted immediately. And Chester, the cat who changed the fate of $500 million, was officially adopted by Sarah herself. He gained weight, shiny coat, complete veterinary care, but never lost the scar on his ear. Some marks exist to remind us where we came from. The Whiskers Foundation became a national reference in animal rescue focused on critical cases. It didn't accept purebred donations. Didn't serve animals from wealthy families who lost pets. Only the invisible ones. The forgotten. Those that humans pass without looking on sidewalks and alleys. In 5 years, the foundation saved more than 20,000 animals from certain death. Built mobile veterinary hospitals. Trained specialized rescue teams. And each adopted animal received a special tag. A small medal with the photo of a 7-year-old boy hugging a skinny cat. Victor and Whiskers. 2 abandoned creatures who finally found redemption through one last courageous choice. This story isn't really about money. 500 million is just numbers. It's about a man who built a fortress of success to hide the wounded boy he never stopped being. It's about a street cat who protected the will of someone he never knew, but who shared his invisible pain. It's about how our last choices define who we really were, regardless of how many decades we spent being someone else. Victor Sterling died a billionaire, but will be remembered as the boy who 60 years later finally went back to save Whiskers. And all the whiskers that the world threw away without looking back. Because in the end, we are judged not by what we accumulated, but by who we saved when nobody else was watching. If this story touched you, if it made you think about who you really want to be when nobody is watching, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. And answer me in the comments. Do you believe it's possible to find redemption, even after decades of wrong choices? Or are some things too late to fix? I want to read your opinion. because deep down, we're all Victor Sterling trying to decide if there's still time to save our own whiskers.